So I want to welcome everybody to this conversation. I'm Jim Basker, the academic director of Oxford Academia, and a professor also at Barnard College, Columbia University in New York. And it's my pleasure to be here today with my colleague and good friend, Haitong Du, who is a member of our faculty in Oxford Academia. He's going to tell you a little bit about his course and the rest of it, but he's got a great personal history. So Haitong, I want to start by asking you to tell us the story of when you were a student in high school, how you came to study in Oxford, and then what that did for the rest of your academic career.
Well, thank you, Jim, for the introduction. So in 2017, I was one of Jim's students. I was a high school junior, and I was looking for something to do during the summer. And of course, being the academic type, I will presume, I wanted to study somewhere, and Oxford, obviously, was one of the best universities in the world. So I looked around and I eventually found Jim's program and I became one of his students, studying international relations, which I'm still studying today. But it's also interesting that I'm really approaching this from the other side of the classroom. I actually get to teach students on the very subject that I've been passionate about for, say, well, how many years at this point? 7 years.
Well,
So
let's take it from the beginning, Haitong. You were born where, went to high school where, and then came to Oxford how?
I was born in China, and then I went to high school in the United States. I was in Southern California, San Diego, and now I'm in the United Kingdom pursuing grad school. So, uh, so three continents in my life.
How long have you been at Oxford?
I first came to Oxford in 2017 via a summer program, Jim's summer program. And then in 2020, I was a visiting student at one of the Oxford colleges when I was an undergraduate student at Tufts University. And then now I'm a graduate student, so it's technically my third tour at Oxford.
What a great career. What's the actual focus of your research work, Haitong? I know you work in international relations, but what's the focus of it?
So my research has a particular focus on U.S. foreign policy. Mainly, it examines U.S.-China relations, but also from a what we call a interagency perspective. When we talk about foreign policy, sometimes we're thinking about a very abstract sense of foreign policy, what states want, right? But I'm actually looking deeper than that. I think a state can want many things because diplomats want different things. The Department of State and the Department of Defense want different things. So I'm looking at the particular bureaucratic arrangement at a particular time. And during those times, US foreign policy might diverge, particularly when it comes to, say, dealing with China. So that's the main focus of my research.
It couldn't be more timely given what's going on in the world. But let's zero in on the course that I'm delighted that you've been teaching on Oxford Academia. Tell us about that course and roughly the topics that you take up in it.
So international relations, the way I teach it, I think there are two ways of teaching international relations in general, right? The first one is really to load up on the history. You can start from Westphalia in
48?
1648. It was 1648, right? You can start from Westphalia in 1648, and then you look at the more contemporary arrangements of the international system. You can talk about World War I, World War II, and then the Cold War, and then, of course, the collapse of empires and how we get where we are today. But I think in a 2-week course, a better way to teach it is to, well, without losing focus on the history, but also teaching some students on some of the theoretical perspectives, some of the lenses, as I call it, to look at the ordering principles in the international society, right? How can we rank states? Can we rank states by, say, military power? Is military power the only form of power we have? Well, probably we should also consider, say, economic power. What about cultural power? Does the United States have a cultural hegemony? What about the United Kingdom? And other than that, what about the collapse of empires, right? We're living in a age where empires are perhaps, in distant memory, but also the countries that founded empires in the first place, the United Kingdom, the United States, and France, well, whether or not there is a American empire, that's of course disputed. But today, these countries are still ranked higher than some other countries in terms of their military power and economic preponderance. So ultimately, how can we really make sense of the world through these various ways of examining the international system? That's the main focus of the course.
Well, I know that you put a lot of new perspectives and a broader horizon in front of your students in the summer. Would you give us an example, because I know you do a lot of interesting things, of one of the most interesting typical lessons that you do, or even a field trip that you make out of class that connects the classroom work with a site in Oxford? How do you do that?
So Oxford is definitely a city just ripe with history. You can just walk around the medieval town center and walk between the buildings, and you will see some plaques, and you can see some houses that used to be occupied by famous people in history. So in my course, I would start the course, in fact, with a trip to one of the Oxford museums, the Pitt Rivers Museum. The Pitt Rivers Museum houses one of the world's largest collections of, say, colonial objects. And one thing I want my students to, of course, go in with, one question I want them to go in with is to examine the objects, to examine where they come from, and then speculate or guess or make the best guesses they can on how the object ended up appear in a museum that belongs to a British university. And I think that really tells the students that the international order we have today is not all peaceful. It's not all about trade. It's not all about economics, but it's also about, say, the colonized subjects staring in the barrel of a gun. But also, on the other hand, we may also look at how empires could have cultivated a more universal understanding of, say, human rights. Does the concept of, say, gender equality come from the British Empire, or was it a more indigenous sense of gender equality, a more indigenous understanding of racial equality that eventually got crushed by these empires? So I think going to a museum and examining these British objects, say objects in British possession, is really the best way to have dialogues with history and have dialogues with the international system we're living in today.
Haitong, that visit to the museum to look at past international relations through a kind of imperial framework is an ingenious way of getting your students to use Oxford as a kind of research lab or even a textbook. But I see Oxford spread behind you. I want to talk about that for a minute because many people don't know that Oxford is really 38 independent colleges brought together under one university, and of course, with lots of buildings in the center. Take us through what it's like for you on a typical day to walk from your college residence on the Thames River into central Oxford. What are some of the historic sites you go by?
Well, that's definitely a loaded question. Without getting into every single historic site, I'll just pick a few. So the first place I run into is the River Thames, the Folly Bridge. The bridge is called Folly Bridge. I live on the other side of the Thames at college accommodation. I'm at Pembroke College. So I will cross the Thames and then get on St. Aldate's, which is the street that runs north to south, and then hit the Christchurch Cathedral. Christchurch Cathedral, of course, as Jim could tell you, is a masterpiece by Sir Christopher Wren, one of the most famous architects, neo-Gothic, if I'm right, architects in British history. And then I would then go to Carfax Tower and then get to High Street. And then High Street is really the main street of Oxford, with all the famous colleges on both sides of High Street. Some of the colleges are, say, for example, Oriel College, Magdalen College, and of course, UNIF, University College, where I believe our program, Oxford Academia, runs during the summer. So it's really at the center of Oxford. And then I would go north when I get onto the, I believe, Ratcliffe Square, and that's where the old Bodleian is located. And of course, how can I forget? Right here, Ratcliffe Camera. My favorite place to work at Oxford is actually the second floor, or should I say the first floor in this country, the first floor of the Radcliffe, Radcliffe camera, or as we just call it, the Radcam. And then I would pass Radcam if I want to go to my department, and then walk straight past this building over here. That will be the old Bodleian Library. And then that will also take me by, of course, the Bridge of Sighs or Hartford Bridge. And then right here, the Sheldonian Theater, where, well, Jim matriculated and I matriculated as Oxford students. So these are some of the famous sites, I would say, at the center of Oxford. And then I will keep going through, I believe, Holywell. And then my department is located right there, Politics and International Relations.
That's a typical day. And, you know, it's a magic world in Oxford, which I've been experiencing like you for many years and love every minute of it. And it's part of the experience students have in the summer, which is so cool. While we're talking about that, would you say a little bit about the students that you have in Oxford Academia in your international relations course, what they're like, where they come from, you know, temperamentally, what are they like as characters?
Well, I would really say I had some of the best experience teaching in my life. The students are really intellectually motivated, and they're self-driven. I'm just going to give one anecdote. So for one of the first classes, I took my students to the Blackwell's bookshop. Blackwell's, of course, has the Norrington Room, which is really located in the basement, which houses one of the world's largest academic collections. And these books, we're not talking about, say, the novels you buy at the airport. No, these are actual academic manuscripts. And then I would tell my students about a couple of books I've read, and then I would see these students hold with their entire hands full, holding the books on their way out. And I'm just like, how are you going to carry that home? And they will say, well, that's a problem to worry about later. I'm going to go back and read these books tonight. And then the next morning, they will catch me at breakfast and say, oh, I read Professor Dominic Johnson's Strategic Instincts, and I want to ask you about your opinions about how evolutionary biology influenced our way of war. And I said, okay, well, let me get my coffee first, and then we'll have this conversation. So these are really some of the most brilliant students I've taught in my life. And really, they teach themselves, I want to say. And I, you know, my role as an instructor is to guide them towards certain directions, and then they propel themselves forward. It's really fortunate as an instructor.
Do they all come from the same school, or do they come from different schools, different parts of the country?
They come from all over the country. And what particularly struck me was that Oxford Academia, I believe, has a scholarship program with a series of schools in New Jersey, and the scholarship students are some students that I believe work the hardest, and it's really fascinating to see how within such a short time span they grow. Because the way I teach my seminars, students do most of the talking, right? I ask them questions and then they talk with each other. That's how seminar teachings work at the graduate level, and that's what I believe high school should be taught. And they starting from the very beginning, they're a little bit reserved and they're a little bit quiet, and towards the very end they participate in every single conversation and they refuse to let a single topic slip.
Of
So
course, they coming from different schools, they don't know each other when they start, but do they begin to form friendships or get to know each other in the course of the session?
they really began forming friendships, and they began forming these I want to say little networks of knowledge sharing, where different people are interested in different things, and then they would just spend their time in the dining hall talking to each other about a piece of news that just came out in the world. It's really wonderful to see.
Do they carry on after they leave? Do you hear from students after the program's over?
Well, just a few weeks ago, a student came to me and asked if I could speak at her high school conference. So yes, they do keep in touch with each other, and they do keep in touch with their instructors, which is wonderful. It's brilliant.
Well, I know that there are a couple of students from the program who had the great good fortune to be admitted to Oxford as undergraduates. So you may bump into one or two in the streets of Oxford in the next few months. But I want to talk for a second also about the colleagues. I mean, one of the joys for me in the program is recruiting people like you, but bringing together scholars in every different field from all over the world who are some of the brightest people I've ever known. All of whom are masters of their subject, but they're also passionate about it and able to share that passion. I know that the faculty gets to know each other and work together. Say a little bit about your sense of your colleagues and any examples who are close to you.
Oh, well, my colleagues are wonderful. Just like the students who are from all over the United States and, of course, from Brazil, from Panama. Um, our faculty members are also from all over the world, right? I was born in China. There are some of my colleagues who are born in Spain, some born in the United States, some born in other parts of Europe. It's a international community of faculties. My favorite, Pablo. Pablo, who's our I believe debate debate instructor, who performed with Marina. Marina's from Spain. Pablo's from, I believe, Jamaica. And then they all sung Schuyler Sisters from Hamilton in one of our coffee house events. So if you don't know what coffee house is, I believe it's a Putney special. We all come to this literal coffee house. It's a real coffee house at Oxford, and then we just perform talent shows. And their performance was, I believe, one of the best versions I've ever seen. I will even watch that one over the original Broadway cast.
I love that memory. And of course, Pablo is also, for all his talent as a singer of the Schuyler Sisters songs, is a Rhodes Scholar from Jamaica. And that's typical of our faculty. We have a lot of Rhodes Scholars and other international scholars and prize-winning scholars like you teaching the kids. You are an example of the inspiration that the program can bring to any single 16 or 15-year-old student and change the course of their lives. Do you see that happening with former students? You've had as students in the program. Do you hear stories like that of other kids?
Well, I'm just gonna say in my department, I believe so in my department we have a buddy system. Every cohort has a one-to-one mentorship system with the next cohort. My grand buddy Taylor, who I invited in as a guest speaker to talk about feminism in international relations. What does feminist IR look like? She was also a student in Jim's program, I believe in 2012. And she's a graduate student. She's a DPhil student in international relations now. I'm a graduate student in international relations. So and then she has tons of friends who are back. I still sometimes hear from the folks in my cohort in 2017 who still come back to Oxford, either as visiting students or as graduate students. So that lineage really carries on. And once you are in Oxford, you will never want to leave. I believe it's one of the famous quotations of one of the authors. It's the greatest desire in your life to stay at the Bodleian Library and read all the books. Now, I don't think I could do that in my lifetime, but it's definitely very tempting.
It is very tempting. Haitong, this is fantastic. I share your love for Oxford, and that's why I keep coming back every year, which I have done for more than 30 years. And it's partly, yes, to get access to the Bodleian and all of that research work, but it's also for the fun of working with a new generation of scholars and putting them in front of students to teach these courses. I want to just ask you one final sort of topical question. If you were encouraging kids to think about applying to the program, you know that we have more than 20 different subjects and major and minor seminars and so on. But suppose a student has never done the subject that they're looking at. How should they decide what to take on? Should they wait to graduate school to come to Oxford, or could they take the plunge as a high school kid in
Definitely walk out of your comfort zone. Definitely get out of your comfort zone as early as possible. One thing that I realized, fortunately, earlier on in my life is that the world is very big and there are a lot to see. There's plenty out there to explore, both geographically and, of course, intellectually. So I I mean, I'm obviously biased. I would say if you have never study international relations, it's okay. You have definitely seen what's going on around the world. You have seen how nations cooperate during the COVID pandemic. You've definitely seen how nations are coming together to fight climate change. But you have also seen how nations have gone to war. And you have also seen the humanitarian atrocities that are unfolding in many parts of the world. Um, Ukraine being one prime example, right? So in the course, you really get to reflect on how we can make the world a better place, but also more importantly, how did we get to where we are today? So I think these are some of the useful lenses, some useful tools I could potentially provide, hopefully, that will eventually be helpful. So definitely get out of your comfort zone. Early on, I got in my comfort zone in 2017, came to Oxford, fell in love with Oxford, and hopefully I'm never going to leave. So
That's a great,
yeah,
I love that story and I love what your subject's about. And I would say, Haitong, that your subject, international relations, is typical of many or the majority, which is to say that it's not a subject that students can do or do in this way in their high school at home. So already by jumping into a subject like that, they're expanding their universe. And we have so many subjects, human rights, business, law, uh, archaeology, so many subjects, psychology, subjects that students can't do in high school. They won't have a background necessarily, but when they, as you say, they jump out of their comfort zone and they experience something that's intellectually fresh and horizon expanding, maybe their future major in college, maybe a lifelong passion, but it's going to make them bigger people intellectually and experientially. And that's what I love, and I know you love it too. So I think we'll close the conversation on that note. I know I'm going to see you in a few weeks. I'll be in Oxford and we'll get together. And I'm really
that's
looking
great.
forward to next summer where we're going to have a fresh crop of kids to work with, maybe some who are listening right now, maybe some who will be taking your course, I'm sure. But
That would be
Haitong,
great.
thank you so much for taking the time to do this conversation. Get back to your research and your writing. I know there's some scholarly work at hand, and I'll see you very
It's due in
soon.
a couple
Thank
of
you.
weeks. So
Thanks, Haitong. Bye-bye.
thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.